All right, week 7, incorporating feedback. This one I think is pretty self-explanatory, but it's more about what to expect in terms of feedback and then how to view it. I think it's easy for us to get our little feelings hurt, myself included. I'm kind of dramatic, so if somebody says, "Oh yeah, that's good," but I'm like, what did you say?" Right? And so anyway, how are we going to incorporate our feedback and how are we going to make it useful? Um, just the whole mindset of feedback. Oh, and let me clarify too. When you do your proposal, the feedback is actually probably the most important part of the whole thing because what they're saying is, okay, we saw what you've done so far. This is how you should make it better. So it's a very integral part of the whole process and very, very valuable. So we don't want to throw it away or ignore it. So things to remember. I just realized that remember is misspelled. It's missing an E and an M. So remember. Remember these things as you go forward. Um, Feedback is a positive thing, right? Uh, it's not a criticism, it's not a critique, it's not them saying you're bad or wrong or whatever. It's positive. It's positive. Even if it's something like, you need to proofread further, right? It may sound like it's negative or a criticism, but in fact, this is how you make it better, right? This is how you improve what you've already done. Um, I've already said this twice in previous lectures, but the committee wants you to be successful. This is a group of people who want to see you do well. And so when they point these things out, it's not out of a place of negativity or dissatisfaction. It's from a place of this is how you improve. This is how we see you reach your full potential, right? And I'll say this again at the end of the PowerPoint, but making these changes now is going to make the defense and ultimately your thesis that much better. So it's not about wow, these things are broken and look what you did wrong. It's about, hey, this is how the final product could be even better. Right? So they're very formative. I've already used that terminology with regard to your proposal. It's very formative in nature, but if you address these sort of things, which you should always address the feedback that you're given, addressing these things now will make that your final defense and your final product that much better, right? So I guess maybe that's something I should have included in here too. Do not ignore feedback, even if it's feedback we don't like, right? Even sometimes committee members will disagree on certain aspects of feedback, right? But it should be addressed. Even if you don't agree with what was said, it should be addressed, right? So they might say, oh, you seem to be using this methodology. I don't think that's the best way to go. You should probably use this. And if the committee agrees, we should make those changes, right? So kind of keep that in mind. You cannot take it personally, which is hard to do, right? Especially because these theses are kind of your baby. They're something that you've built and put a lot of effort into. So yeah, we got to address them and not take it as a personal insult. So some common feedback that you might see that you'll probably see for your initial proposal there. It needs additional proofreading, and hopefully they don't say this about your actual proposal presentation. As I said in the previous lecture, it should be flawless. But the paper itself, of course, is going to have some mistakes in it. You can do all the proofreading you want, and still there will be mistakes. This comment, by the way, can be a general comment, as in, oh, make sure you proofread again, because everyone should always proofread more, all the way up to, wow, did you proofread at all, right? So it's going to range quite a bit. What you want to listen for is the seriousness of this feedback, right? In terms of, are they talking about just making sure that everything looks good or going back and really hardcore correcting commas and tense and perspective and things like this? They will be clear, right? So this is not this might be a general comment, but you need to make sure you're clear on how, what level of proofreading this needs to undertake. They might even suggest to hire a proofreader or hire an editor. Do not take this as a negative thing, right? Make sure, and I would recommend that you do this. If they suggest this, it usually means that there's probably more severe or concerning aspects that need to be addressed. And sometimes we just don't see it, right? Especially as we write this, we might write it and read it in our mind in the way we intend it to sound. In reality, it doesn't come across that way, right? So hiring a proofreader is not an insult to you. It's not an affront to your abilities. Just if they suggest that, that's probably a good idea. Additional references. References are kind of like money. You could always have more. But when they say additional references, they're typically referring to the fact that your argument doesn't have as much support as it might based on prior research. So this is where chapter 2 comes in, your lit review. They probably just want you to expand your chapter 2 and say, hey, you know what? You only included three studies to validate this particular point, find some other ones, right? And an easy way to do this is to use the studies that you've already found and go back to their references in those particular studies and see which studies they referenced and kind of expand from there. Um, this is a very common thing to discuss. And to be very honest with you, as you move into the second phase of your thesis, when you go from proposing to defending, there will be additional sources coming along anyway, or should be, as part of the process. So additional references, once again, this is going to have to do with chapter 2. And your committee might even suggest who to look for or what keywords to search for. That's part of the game. Clarifying hypotheses. This is one, actually, this is probably the most common feedback I give as a committee member, as a chair, because often what our hypotheses are stating and what our methodology is doing don't connect perfectly. We want them to connect in a very linear way. So if you're saying there's a significant difference between A and B, are you actually testing for a significant difference between A and B, right? So we want to make sure that the hypotheses and the methodology match up. Usually, when we have to clarify our hypothesis, it's not a matter of changing the methodology. It's a matter of going back and rewriting, to some extent, the hypotheses. And I think, and I know I've said this in a previous lecture, but your research questions should line up with your hypotheses, which in turn should line up with your methodology. So it's a three-phase sort of structure here, from research questions to hypotheses to methodology. So if they say clarify hypotheses, it's usually not the front end, which is the research questions, and not the back end, which is the methodology. It's usually right there, where there's some rewriting. This, like I said, very commonly given. I give this one a lot. They might also bring up what's referred to as your theoretical framework, right? So with any of these theses, they should be based on some theoretical stance, right? Social identity theory, cognitive behavioral theory, whatever theory your research is grounded in, you need to be clear about this. And this needs to be included in both your introduction chapter and your lit review, and potentially chapter 3 as well. It might span all three, but at least the first two, right? Your theoretical framework needs to be very clear. You could even state this research is based on the theoretical framework of blah, 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 right? So when you talk about that, you want to this is kind of the foundation. We are building our house on this. I kind of equate it sometimes to citing the Bible that you're using. So when you quote scripture, you might actually say, New International Version, NIV, right, or whatever, right, King James Version, whatever, right, New American Version. In this case, what you're doing is you're saying this is a theoretical framework we're working within, because each interpretation, or rather, each translation of the Bible varies a bit based on certain factors, right? So be clear what your theoretical framework is. Make sure it's present. In some cases, we've gotten to the proposal stage and there's not a theoretical framework. So try not to let that happen. Make sure you include that prior to your proposal. And there's some things to kind of take forward with you after you go to propose is, obviously, based on what you get for your proposal in terms of feedback, utilize that towards your defense. That is, essentially, your feedback is your first step towards your defense. So you propose, okay, good. That's part 1. Now we're moving on to part 2, and the feedback is where that starts from. All right, so think of how it might be integrated in your defense, and what it means for that process, right? What you want to do is take all of this feedback collectively and think about, okay, what is my committee really focused on? Sometimes you get committees that are really focused on the writing aspect, right? How does the writing come together? Others are really focused on the methodology or really focused on the data or whatever. So kind of look back at the feedback and think, okay, what do they really want to see? What is this committee in particular looking to see, hear, understand, what have you, right? What do they want? Because as I said, each committee kind of varies slightly. And then number 3 on this, as you look ahead, you do not want to make the same mistakes twice, okay? Because this speaks volumes for, well, I mean, it says a lot of things about your study and your writing and your research, and maybe even potentially you to some extent, right? If the committee says in the proposal, fix this, do this, don't do this, right? The last thing you want to do is do it again, or don't do it again, whatever the feedback happens to be, at the defense stage, right? Because effectively that is telling your committee, I ignored what you said, right? For whatever reason. You don't have to interpret it beyond that, but I did not heed what you said to do or not do, and I've made that same sort of mistake again. So what it tells your committee is that there is certain growth that they expected to take place between the proposal and the defense that has not happened for whatever reason. And the interpretation of that reason is irrelevant, but it didn't happen. And so we cannot have this take place, right? So what I would recommend is when you propose, take that feedback, utilize it in your rewrites or addressing whatever concerns they have like this, right? But hang on to it, because I would recommend reviewing that feedback prior to your defense. So you say, oh, you know what? When I proposed last time, they said this. I got to make sure that that's locked down, right? Or I got to make sure to do that or to not do that, whatever it happens to be. The point of this is all is being, let's make sure that this is truly a formative process and that whatever issues, concerns, whatever are brought up, they can be effectively addressed, and so that when you get to your defense, you have created an even better product.